All right, great. So we'll go ahead and get started. First of all, I wanted to welcome all our guests, both managers and board members that are here today.
Okay.
I want to welcome the panel here. Just want to let everyone know, for security reasons, all attendees have been muted and videos have been turned off. If you wish to ask any questions pertaining to the class or to the material, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom and center of the screen, and we'll go ahead and answer your questions as we can. Included on the chat, we've also included both Paul, and my email. So should you have any questions that aren't answered during this webinar, please don't hesitate to reach out to one of us. I'm sure we'll be happy to answer all your questions related to our industry. For any questions that are not related to presentation, not legal questions, we do have Diana that will be answering some of those questions on the chat. As a note, CAMs must turn in their evaluation to receive their CE credits. They can turn it into the email that's within the chat, which is at evaluation@angusandterry.com. Board members, feel free to complete the evaluation as well. We're always looking for feedback in order to improve our webinars, the way we present them, as well as the information that we provide to you today. Thank you again for all of those of you that are here, that are ready to go through a little bit of the webinar of the Chapter 558, Understanding Construction Defects and its Process. Before we get started, I want to say a few words that Benjamin Franklin said best about education. Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. So that goes to say, for a lot of the managers and the board members that are here today, you know, what you're doing today, it's an acknowledgement, because while some of you get paid, most of you don't get paid. Board members don't get paid. So I just wanted to thank you for that. So before I get started, I wanted to introduce the panelists. So I'm fortunate to be sitting here alongside. And I'll start off with Ben Messerschmitt. Ben Messerschmitt work experience ranges from forensic and engineering assessment of mid and high-rise luxury condominiums, master plan residential communities, residential buildings, parking structures, structural failures, and building code compliance deficiencies. As a certified diver, he performs condition assessments of seawalls, pilings, and overall site conditions to provide comprehensive condition assessment reporting. Mr. Messerschmitt utilizes these experiences and knowledge to provide expert engineering consultation and assistance to condominiums, homeowners, and property owners associations dealing with construction defects and their costly effects. Epic Forensic and Engineering is a full-service, multidisciplinary engineering consulting firm, keeping very true to its name. Epic is accomplished staff of qualified forensic experts, have assisted associations for hundreds of South Florida 558 cases with successful outcomes. I know we're working on a couple together. Either following or during the construction defect process, Epic's engineering and construction management professionals assist its clients through efficient design, inspections, management, and owner's representation to ensure comprehensive and correctly executed repair and restoration projects. Welcome aboard, Ben, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here.
Thank you. I wanted to introduce now Mr. Paul Terry Jr., co-founder and managing partner of Angus and Terry, construction defects attorney. Since 1984, Mr. Terry has focused his practice on assisting condominium and homeowners association, apartment owners, and property owners resolve their construction defect issues. He's also assists these property owners with insurance coverage for property and storm damage. His unique combination of knowledge and experience enabled him to secure a $19.3 million recovery for a 30-story high-rise condominium association. Angus and Terry attorneys are committed to representing their homeowners to smooth their way through the maze that is developer transition, maze to say the least. Their focus is on homeowners and their motivation for well-orchestrated and economically rational transitions. Angus and Terry strives to ensure that their construction defect claims are handled in an aggressive and yet cost-efficient manner, and will continue to work with their clients after the construction defect claims are concluded as a member of their reconstruction team to ensure that the money received from the builders is spent wisely and the interest of their clients continue to protect during the repair and reconstruction process. Thank you very much, Paul, for being here with us today.
Thank you.
A little bit about myself. My name is Rafael Aquino. I am the co-founder and CEO of Affinity Management Services, We are an association management company which services both Palm Beach, Dade, and Broward County. We service close to just shy of about 8,000 units throughout the Tri-County area. I do have an engineering background as well, so our approach to management does come with a very structured and analytical way of managing condo associations and homeowners association. So I think enough about us. I think let's get into some of the questions that our participants probably have here today. So what I'll do is I'll ask you gentlemen a couple questions and we can kind of chime off of what your thoughts are and how you would approach it. I'm going to start off with you, Paul.
Okay.
At what point do you enter into the transition, and what practical advice do you have for the new board members?
Okay, so in the transition process, you really have 3 stages. You have the stage from the point where 90% of the units have been sold, and so the timeline starts. And then there's a 90-day, what I call dead period, because really nothing goes on officially. Then you have anywhere from a 75 to a 90-day period where the election of the homeowner board takes place. And then you have the events that immediately follow taking over of the board. We normally come into the process, 45 to 60 days into that dead period. And what our role typically is working with the existing manager, who is typically acting as the developer's director or agent, and start gathering all the documents and information that are required to be turned over once the homeowner election takes place. It is an opportunity for board members to begin to communicate with each other about who wants to be on the board, to evaluate whether or not there's any talent in their community, let's say a CPA or an accountant who can act as a treasurer, skills like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also an opportunity for the manager and for those prospective board members to really explore whether or not they want to maintain a relationship. Some managers basically represent developers, and then once the transition takes place, they're gone. But I think it's more often that they would like to hold on to that account, and that's an opportunity for them to demonstrate to the prospective board members that they really do have the board members and homeowners issues at heart, and they're going to look out for their interest, and it makes sense for that board to keep them on, so that the first item of business after the election isn't hiring a new management company. And this 90-day dead period, it really provides an opportunity for the manager to accomplish that. And then once you roll into the third period, you have all the issues that come up with the transition in terms of evaluating your project, making sure that the finances are in appropriate condition, hiring a CPA, hiring somebody to handle your collections, all the things that go with the actual day-to-day operation of an association.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. So I know from a management perspective, the transition is a very key turnover, especially with the information that must be provided. I mean, the Florida statute does give you a list of the items that the developer should provide to you. And I put in quotations should, because that were must, but sometimes they don't. I wanted to ask you, Ben, from an engineering perspective, I know that there's certain documents that we must receive in order for you to be able to do your job during the turnover. Could you give us a little bit of an idea of what a board or a manager should be looking for that's very important so that you could be able to do your engineering side very effectively?
Yes, absolutely. So aside from doing and trying to collect as many of the items that are within the statute 718 and 720, if you're in a condo or an HOA respectively, there's plenty that can be done by the association. Because think about it from a transition point, when you're developer controlled versus association controlled, that handover, that changeover, you're starting a clock, a brand new clock.
Correct.
Or even think about it as you're getting you're purchasing a used car. You have certain expectations that when you go and pick up the vehicle, it's going to have 4 inflated tires and a steering wheel. But if for some reason you show up and you have 3 inflated tires, now we got a problem. But the analysis and everything is done right at that changeover, so it couldn't have been caused by the association.
Correct.
So in addition to, at least from a document standpoint of things, the number one thing from any engineer that would be hired on in a sort of defect process, I would say would be to get a list of known deficiencies from the association. And that could be through the management company as well as select members of the board. Regardless of the approach that's taken with the engineering study, the engineer is only going to be there a couple times, or not a couple, but up to, let's say, 8 different times, depending on the amount or the size of the property. That's never going to be as expansive as 100% homeowner that's going to be there, even a management company that's currently on site day in, day out. The list of known defects is going to give the background for the engineer, number one, and also having and maintaining any sort of receipts that would be of repairs or replacements that would be considered in excess of a maintenance style repair, because that's the most crucial part. I mean, maintenance, we understand that maintenance has to go ahead and take place even during developer control. But looking at the actual dollar figures, if, let's say, a very large pump were to be replaced immediately after turnover, that's not very typical. The lifespan of a typical large-scale pump is going to be much greater than what you expect to have a small little pool pump. So if that fails for whatever reason, that's a first area that an engineer would come in and do an analysis on to determine what is that cause of failure and is it due to construction defects.
Okay. And I also want to point out, at least from the management side, I know one of the most important key points, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, is to make sure that you're receiving the as-built, right? Because a lot of times, if for you, I believe it makes your job much more difficult of really being able to identify where potential weaknesses or where things are. So for those board members that are on, or managers, it's very important that you get those as-builts, because I'm sure, Paul, as well, you would agree that within those as-builts, you can determine if they built something that they should have built and maybe they didn't, right? Misrepresentation of what was sold to the potential client.
Remember that under the statute that the developer is required to turn over a certified set of the drawings, certified by either the developer or the architect or engineer of record, that these are the actual plans that were used to build the project. And since they're supposed to be the actual plans that were used, that basically translates into the as-built. And oftentimes you can compare what was built out there to what was supposed to have been built. And so one of the keys, at least particularly from my perspective, legally, is to make sure you get that certified set. Because then you can't have the developer or the contractor trying to hem and haw about whether or not they really were supposed to build that or not build that. If you have the certified set, they're stuck with it.
Correct. So I'm going to ask you, Paul, because I know that this has occurred before when we've taken on, most associations we take on is normally they're changing the managing company because they want a brand new, fresh relationship, kind of what you stated earlier. However, we've seen that a lot of times, they'll come to the transition meeting, and unfortunately, they'll say, yes, we'll provide you that information in the near future. However, they'll have the manager, someone sign off a simple document saying that they've provided everything. What are your recommendations, Paul, when it comes to that kind of instance, when that meeting is occurring and they're not providing, and I should say the developer is not providing all the information that they should provide based on the statute?
Well, certainly when we're involved, we start well before that turnover meeting. And start trying to collect that information, and we want to make sure we've created a steady line of correspondence. First to the manager, and then if the manager either refuses or more commonly they're trying to get the information, the developer's just not giving it to them. And then we'll direct our communications to the developer, him or herself. And we just want to show there's a steady line of efforts to gather the information. And then if we still can't get it as of the date of the turnover meeting, then we'll make one last demand letter and then go to court. There's a statute that applies for condominiums, not for homeowner associations, that basically provides for a summary procedure to force the steps in transition to take place. And I call it a trial on steroids. I mean, you have to file an answer within 5 days. You're in trial within 90 days. It's very, very, very quick. And usually once you make a demand pursuant to that, you get everything, because one of the other things is that the prevailing party gets their attorney's fees.
Of
So
course.
as soon as the developer figures that out, then they decide maybe we ought to produce that stuff. So, hey, and just to back up a little bit, one other thing that we didn't mention that's important is that in condominium projects, at the turnover meeting, the builder is required to turn over an engineering turnover report. And it's supposed to have a number of systems be examined. They're all laid out in the statute. And the engineer has got to evaluate them, indicate how much useful life they have left, what their maintenance cost is going to be. And this is an extraordinarily key document because in Florida, we have a 4-year statute of limitations on certain claims. And if a claim is described in that turnover report, and you don't do anything about it for 4 years, you've lost the claim. It's also, I think, helpful for the engineer who's trying to evaluate the building for the association to have that information in addition to whatever else he or she comes up with.
Yeah, and if I may just tag on to that, sorry to jump in before you, Rafael. So yes, so that would be what we typically call like a 718 developer turnover report, which would be hired directly, an engineer hired directly by the developer to do that sort of, quite frankly, cursory review. And it's really just a categorization of what components are there with a very limited description of their functionality, their purpose, and their lifespan. It really all consists of about 3 different graphs or 3 different charts of what you have, make and model, warranty period, useful lifespan, and current condition. And it's very, very cursory, which is the one big thing that we see with some condo associations and HOA associations that may not have gone through this transition before, or the members, is that they tend to confuse that 718 report with the Florida Statute 558 report. And that 558 report, the big difference is that is a very much an in-depth visual evaluation of what you have on the property, and the engineer at that point is hired by the already turned over condominium association HOA. So that is a much deeper detail, and that will outline your construction related deficiencies or deviations that you may have from the plan.
Excellent point there. And Paul, let me ask you, what's been your experience with having to put together maybe a transition committee to assist in assembling all this information?
Great question. I just had a huge conference call with a bunch of homeowners yesterday on this very issue, and there was one attorney in the group, and he was saying, well, there's no such thing as an ad hoc or a transition committee, and the answer is, well, that's true technically, but they're very commonly formed. It's an informal group, but it's an opportunity for homeowners who are interested in the maintenance of their homes and their development to start talking to one another. They can initiate the collection of the documents, but normally they're going to have some kind of legal representation involved to direct them into what documents actually have to be produced, and to put pressure on both the manager and the developer to actually begin to produce those documents.
Excellent. And Ben, outside of that report that you mentioned a little bit earlier, is there anything else that would make your life a little bit easier that maybe we could advise these board members or managers that are considering putting together a transition committee?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, from a documentation standpoint, one thing we would love, and I actually broke it down a little bit just by even type of association. So for a condo association, I would love, and we'd love to get the set of your post-tensioning shop drawings, for example, which is going to be a very large structural component of the property. Also your railing shop drawings, which would be a separate submittal that is not typically part of the as-built or the record set of plans. So these would need to be directed or collected at the city or at some party. And it's a wish list item, don't get me wrong. I mean, very rarely do we get it on the front end. Very rarely do we get accurate plans on the front end. That's a different story. So, but that would absolutely be on a wish list. If you're part of an HOA, I would definitely say getting any of the water management district plans, because that's an entirely different submittal. If you can get anything from Durham, that would be awesome. Irrigation shop drawings is also extremely beneficial to get a hold of, because you probably have thousands upon thousands of irrigation heads someplace.
Correct. Excellent. Thank you for that point. And with regards to what practical issues, Paul, have you seen during the transition process from the developer to the board of directors?
Well, the practical problems that show up are that the developer very rarely has any interest in controlling the behavior of the homeowners. And so, you know, if you're in a high-rise condo, it's somewhat less of an issue because you don't have the same architectural review issues. But you still have the same problem. They're just not really interested in that. They're interested in selling out their units and getting out. So, so that can be a big issue. The other one is making sure that you get all of the money from the builder that you're supposed to get. A lot of associations have required payments, reserve payments that are part of the purchase price or any sales price. And I've seen developers try to argue that that's their money, not the association's money, and things like that. You know, I was going to just add in, you know, one of the other things that we do that is available, not just from us, is that we want all the homeowners to fill out an online survey that takes them through all the systems in the building as it affects the homeowner, and then asks them a whole series of questions designed to elicit from them you know, information about how the building systems have performed in the time that they've been in the unit. And I think that's another thing that we could turn over to the engineer.
Of course. And Paul, I wanted to ask you also, because sometimes we come across, you know, conflicts where board members, I know I received this question that, you know, the board's concerned of using the same firm that's representing the developer now, even though it's the same firm is saying they can represent the association now, especially on the 558 claim. What's your take or what's your opinion on that? Is that a question that that new board should have with the firm that they were considering hiring?
Well, I think there's a couple aspects to that. Number one, there isn't a legal conflict of interest in the sense that you implicate the rules of professional conduct. But there is what we consider to be a transactional conflict of interest. And that's that if you're constantly taking positions that favor developers and you get your business from developers, the likelihood, I think, that you can be completely objective when you're being asked by another client to take a position that's the exact opposite of the position they took just recently. I think that's challenging, and I think it's a little unrealistic to expect that any human being is going to be capable of doing that.
Yeah.
So for us, although early in my career I represented a lot of developers, I left that a long time ago, and we don't represent any developers or builders or contractors anymore. Just for that reason, is that you want to have I guess purity, if you will, of representation. So there's no question, there's nothing that could possibly compromise your zealous representation of that client.
Excellent. No,
you definitely don't want it to be the person who's hired by the developer.
Yeah, of course. No, that's a point that I wanted to make sure we brought up. And Ben, I wanted to ask you, so let's get into a little bit with regards to the actual defects. Could you tell us a little bit of what a construction defect is, and how does the association maneuver through that from an engineering perspective? And Paul, I'll get to you from a legal side after.
Sure. So as far as a construction defect is concerned, now that could literally be anything from a wall outlet being installed greater than 6 inches away from, or 6 feet away from a opening, which is just a code requirement, to stucco falling off the building or water intrusion coming in. It is a very wide gambit, so to speak, in how it's even defined. So from our analysis, we really look at we categorize them in 3 or 4 different ways, quite frankly. So you have just your code violation, which is pretty straightforward. So violating any sort of code or industry standard. You have a deviation, which the plan says paint this wall red, but the wall's blue. So it may not be an issue, but it still is a deviation. You have your traditional just defect, which is mainly going to be a workmanship related item. Or something just not performing up to its expected standard or inherent warranties, quite frankly. And then you have a unique one, which is an improper developer turnover maintenance, which is having that expectation very similar to what I mentioned earlier with the used car of the inflated tires. You have an inherent expectation of something to be a certain way, however, it doesn't end up being so. Now, from our scope, from the engineer scope for the 558 study, it is mainly going to be a visual-based study as a first step. because it's really intended, the reporting, to be a notice report. You're providing notice to the opposing side that there is an issue.
Okay.
Not giving them the final answer as to the full cause if it requires more work, but you're still placing them on notice that there is a construction defect and something needs to go ahead and happen. So we'll basically evaluate, document, and present it in a manner that will exceed those requirements of the 558 statute.
Okay, excellent. And Paul, from a legal perspective?
Well, I think that we have lots of fancy legal definitions, but what we really focus on is the what's called under law the implied warranty of merchantability and fitness for its intended purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And what that really means is that all the components are supposed to perform the way a normal person would expect them to perform. If they don't, odds are pretty good they're a construction defect. Now, Ben will point out, therefore, exactly why it's doing that. But from the homeowner's perspective, the easy way to tell is just that it's not doing what you would expect it to do, or it's not lasting as long as you would expect it to last. That's going to be your tip-off that it is, in fact, a construction defect, and then we need to get to the bottom of why that's happening.
Okay, excellent. We keep throwing the word 558 around, like, if everyone knows. Paul, can you give us a little bit of an idea of what?
Sure. That's a great idea. So in Florida, we have a construction defect statute. It is located in Chapter 558. So that really in Florida, the words construction defect claim and 558 claim are interchangeable. They just mean the same thing. Under Chapter 558, you are required to provide a builder or contractor with a notice of claim, which describes in reasonable detail each of the defects that you allege and where they're located. And then the developer has an opportunity to notify the subs, come out and inspect, and then make some kind of settlement proposal if they want. And then the association can respond to that. Then that whole process has to take place before the association can proceed with any kind of litigation claim. So that notice of claim is typically referred to as a 558 notice, obviously because it's in Chapter 558. And that's what most people think about as the 558 process. Once you get into litigation, Chapter 558 continues to define what a construction defect is, but it doesn't really have a lot to do with how the process proceeds after that.
Okay.
Procedurally, its impact is primarily in the pre-litigation stage.
Okay.
And then defining what a construction defect is for any subsequent litigation.
Okay, excellent. And Ben, when the board's ready to move forward and actually start looking for an engineer to hire, what do you recommend our board members and managers? What should they be looking for in an engineering firm? What kind of area of expertise? What kind of background would you say they should be looking for?
So one big thing that we see, and one thing I would absolutely recommend to any board, is understanding the dynamic, understanding the personnel of that group, whatever engineering firm they're undertaking. There's a big difference from a thought process of when you had like a design engineer, which we all went to school for, and Rafael, you went to the same schools, so you understand what I'm talking about. Is you have that technical foundation. We all have that same technical foundation, but looking at it with a forensic eye, so to speak, that is really what's going to be the most important focus. And one other thing that I would also go ahead and recommend is ask questions like how many cases have been settled with that specific engineer. Because that's going to be very telling, because they would have gone through, or that team would have gone through from start to finish several times over. And there's a lot of nuances that quite frankly, we can't get into just on this call alone, that are going to be very crucial to how that process runs and how efficiently or inefficiently it does go. So those would be my two big takeaways. Just like any other vendor, quite frankly, you want to minimize the amount of any subcontractors that you have. So asking how many staff members they have, what availability they have, what are the backgrounds of their engineers, even potentially request some of their CVs of some of their professionals that would be on the case. I think that's all crucial information that should be considered as part of the interview process.
Excellent.
Ben, if I could piggyback on that a little bit, I would say there are three categories of engineers. There are the design engineers. There are engineers that focus on the repair of buildings, but there's a third category, and those are the ones that I call the forensic engineers. And they are not only able to evaluate a building, but they've been through the litigation process. And frankly, there are parts of the litigation process that are opposite of what engineers are taught in school. And until an engineer has gone through this process a number of times, they don't really understand the rules of engagement in the litigation process. And what's perfectly appropriate in other contexts is the death knell in the litigation context. And so you want to find an engineer that has a lot of experience, not just with repairs and rehabilitating buildings, but with litigating, because that's a whole different ball of wax. It's got different rules, it's got different nuances to it. And if you don't play it correctly, you will lose money. So
absolutely, yeah. Even just very specific key terms used in certain reports or certain meetings can absolutely devastate any claims. So I'm 100% with you on that.
No, correct. You nailed it on the head, Paul, because I know we've had to go through the process of obtaining the proposals, and you can see a major difference sometimes in price. And I try to tell the board members, listen, you can't focus on the price. You know, a lot of times you need to work with firms that are experts in that area. I mean, I know two of our clients are currently working with both of your firms, and you guys have been doing an excellent job. There was a difference in price, but now the service and the value that's being brought to the association is astronomical, you know? So one of the questions that I have here, Ben, that's towards you is there a way to get an estimated cost for the engineering firm to do this process? Is it based on number of units, square footage? How also, or is there charges, for additional investigation work?
Yes, so that's a great question. So now the way that it's typically built is, I mean, it's just a function of time. I mean, engineers aren't producing a product. We're not designing a box and you are buying that box. So it's really just a function of that staff and how much time it's really going to go ahead and take.
Of course.
Now, if you're, let's say for a condo association, for example, in the more traditional sense, you have a 400 unit condo tower. In the front end, there is zero need to go ahead and access 100% of those units. Doing, at least from my standpoint of things, anywhere between a 10 to 20% of those initial units of actually accessing those, that would be the basis of our evaluation.
Right.
And even using what Paul was talking about of actually getting like a unit over survey out, that's also a very useful tool as well to try to capture some more global items, so to speak. Now, one very important thing is really to understand the purpose of the report, and it being a notice report. And you may not have all the answers on the front end of that notice report, but you do know that it's not living up to what it should be living to, as Paul had mentioned before. So you can expect that there will be additional charges thereafter, even just with the communication between both parties, so to speak. So your engineering expert talking to the opposing expert, or doing joint destructive evaluations to figure out why your pool is sinking, why you have tripping hazards everywhere, why the stucco is falling off the building. There will be some things that will develop over time, but having the right staff there, on both from engineering and legal, you're going to go ahead and know what's going to be the most effective approach. Because the hope is that you can have some sort of cost savings between both sides. Typically in the engineering realm, at least, and then Paul, I'm sure you can talk about the legal realm, but we run into the same people.
Yeah.
I mean, our pond is very small, so to speak. We have a very good working professional relationship with everybody on our side and the opposing side.
Of course.
So in a utopia, we'd expect the engineers can work together perfectly and the cost would be taken care of, but unfortunately, engineers don't control the cost of who pays for our time. But we love to have joint ventures at all points because it makes it way more open and way more fluid and a much faster result, quite frankly. And you don't have to worry about the telephone game of the back and forth of the he said and the she said.
Of course. No, you bring up an excellent point, because you have to keep in mind, like we try to advise, at least from the management side, our boards is, you're making a business decision here. If you have a sinking pool or if you have major structural issues that are construction defects, then the focus really needs to be is making that the property whole and making sure that that gets addressed. Because if you don't address it because you're focused on what you're going to spend today, what it's going to cost you in the future is going to be significantly more, and you're most likely going to have to pay with much more added interest and effort involved. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Ben, can I inject something else here? And that is that the role of the engineer is to do exactly, excuse me, Raphael, exactly as Ben has said. But one of the other things that's very important in this process is looking at where the money is coming from. So while you do your initial notice investigation, at the same time, the attorney should be beginning to explore where the money is going to come from. And that's typically going to be, at least in large measure, insurance. So you need to be tracking down that insurance. You need to be communicating with the engineer about what kinds of things are covered under the insurance that's available, what kind of things are not covered under the insurance that's available, so that you don't have your engineer hanging their hat on some big issue and it's pretty clear that under the insurance policies it's not covered. And so that you have then the insurance company jumping up and down and applauding that everything's being blamed on this one condition that's not covered. So as you work through these early stages in the process, there's the technical engineering side to it, but then there's some practical sides to it in terms of where that money is going to come at the end of the day.
And
of course.
Sorry, Raphael, if I can just jump on one thing that you actually said. So looking at it from an essential ROI of any additional engineering that may need to be expended to go ahead and prove an item. I mean, at no point, I mean, should any association be put in a position where the cost of the repair is going to be the same cost as the engineering. I mean, that's the simplest decision that any board is ever going to be able to make. But for some of these larger scale issues, and typically they tend to be on the exterior buildings or dealing with moisture intrusion, quite frankly, because that's going to have a ripple effect on the things that it damages. Yeah. I mean, you're really talking about a percentage that the association is really going to have to front, quite frankly, but you're looking to seek a much higher return. And with those many parties, that it will be typically a insurable cost. So you activate insurance, and as long as reports and things are presented in a certain way, you can achieve those goals, or at least put yourself in the best position to achieve those goals.
Of course, that's an excellent point. And Paul, I wanted to ask you the same, because I know we get that question all the time. So what do you believe the association, the attorney is going to charge us to handle this claim? If you can give us an idea on that, and also if you could elaborate a little bit on the recent case that, you know, where insurances do get involved. We know what we're talking about, but some of the board members are not aware of when you mentioned what kind of insurance and whose insurance is going to cover any of these kinds of claims and losses.
Sure. So in terms of the insurance part and paying attention to the insurance part, the association itself is going to have an insurance policy. Typically, it's called a first party policy or a property policy or something like that. It will have an exclusion in of construction defects. They'll have a directors and officers policy. That will also have an exclusion in it for construction defects. So the insurance policies that we're talking about are the insurance policies that are held by the developer, the general contractor, and the subcontractors.
Correct.
And there are provisions in there that will provide coverage for these construction defects. It's called products/completed operations. And those are the things that we really want to start looking at. And sometimes you'll see a subcontractor who, and this is really kind of amazing that this even happens, but they'll have an exclusion in their insurance policy for construction defects. Those are out there. But you want to catch that though early on, because if there's a subcontractor that's got an exclusion for construction defects, which essentially means they have no insurance, you don't want to be blaming that subcontractor for problems that are in your building, because there won't be insurance for it.
Of course.
And so that's really a practical example of some of the things that that we're looking for. The same thing is true as if the insurance of a subcontractor turns out they didn't even have any insurance. They were self-insured and they went bankrupt. A lot of things like that, where the insurance on the subcontractor side or the developer side just isn't available. And so we want to make sure that in assessing blame, if you will, that we keep some of those shortcomings in mind and kind of steer things perhaps in a different direction. Choosing my words carefully.
And with regards from a legal side, what are the estimated or rough? I mean, I'm expecting a number, but what can a board
Sure.
look
Well,
at?
okay, so that's a good, so the question is first, do you want to hire an attorney on an hourly fee basis or on a contingency fee basis? And I'll tell you, I have a prejudice in favor of contingency fees. And the reason for that is that I don't have to worry then about whether or not the association has the money to do the case properly, because I know I do. There's a lot of attorneys who don't have the economic wherewithal to handle a case on a contingency, because that requires that you advance all of the engineering expenses, all the Ben's fees, and you have to be set up to do that. You have to have the economic backing to be able to do something like that. And if an attorney doesn't have that, they will try and talk the association into going hourly, because that's the only way that they can take the case. There are some cases that make sense to be done on an hourly fee basis. But those cases are going to be large, number one, and number two, situations where the association has access to funds, and I'm talking like, 7-figure funds, and perhaps as importantly, the willingness to spend them.
Yeah.
So those are, the contingent fee typically is going to be a third of the recovery, and that's not insignificant. And I'm not going to mean to try to suggest it's insignificant or anything. But the great thing about it is that it puts the attorney in the same boat with the association, because the more the association can recover, the more money the attorney's going to get, and the more money the association is going to get.
Correct.
On an hourly fee basis, it sometimes sounds great, if you can settle without there being litigation, because at the very beginning of the case, your fees don't really add up to that much. But if you get into full-blown litigation and multiple tracks of depositions and all kinds of specialists, it gets very, very expensive. In our experience, it'll pay off in the end. But in the meantime, the association is going to be shelling out a lot of money, and if they either run out or they lose the willingness to spend that money every month, then it will undermine the value of their claim. They're actually going to recover less.
Of course.
Yeah. One of the things that we do is we have a provision in our contract that if they can settle without there being litigation, we allow them to pay us as if they've been on an hourly fee contract.
Oh, wow.
So that they can get the benefits of the hourly fee contract for an early settlement, but then they don't have to pay out every month. If it's going to be a long-term thing, they can go with the contingency.
Of course. Wow, that's a great way of managing it. That way you can make a good decision also, and it's a win-win for both, So with what you said, Paul, obviously the 558, I know we've gone through it and we're going through it still right now. It's a process. So I like to try to set expectations with clients as best as I can, right? I mean, that's our goal. But could we give them an idea? Could we give our board members and managers an idea of the time frame that we're looking at? Obviously, there's a lot of factors that fall into play. The kind of developer we're dealing with, the size of the project, the kind of attorneys that we're dealing with on the other side as well. So just to give our board members and our managers an idea, Ben, if you could give them an idea of what your experience has been kind of from start to finish. And again, I do know some cases get settled and some are differently, but just to kind of give them an idea, because our experience has been when we're interviewing, for being new management company, can you get this 558 claim done in 6 months? And I just, give them this look,
I hear you.
Sometimes honesty is the way to go, but if you can kind of give our board members an idea of what they're looking at when they're dealing with these claims.
Sure, absolutely. And as far as any sort of like presentations I know that we do, and then I do personally, I try to rip the Band-Aid off as soon as possible.
Yeah.
If you're expecting something fast, the 558 is not fast. There's one benefit though, that it is optional. So at least you have that out at any point in time. But our typical range, I would say, would be anywhere from 2 to 4 years from when you actually sign on the engineer would be probably a fair assessment. Now, there are some cases that we've actually settled within, 4 months of being hired on.
Yeah.
But that was already late into the game of that 4-year statute of limitations that Paul was talking about. And we needed to come in, do all of our evaluations and write the report within a month, have a mediation the next month, have depots the next month, and go ahead and get it settled on the footsteps or the doorstep of the court. So, and then we've also had the entirely opposite end of the opposing sides, like you mentioned, attorneys and even insurance really slowing down the process. And we've been part of cases that have had to go through moratorium and then go even further down the line to about 8 years.
Wow.
And I mean, these cases are a sore spot for everybody involved, quite frankly, because you have the association, the actual everyone else besides the board clamoring, and it does get painful over time. And one thing we do see is just it wears on the association hard, and on the board, and any new election that comes on, it's almost like a retraining comes in.
Of course.
The amount of information that's passed through.
Yeah, Raphael, I can just about guarantee you that any case that's taking more than 3 years the attorneys are being paid hourly.
Yeah.
I would absolutely agree with that as well. 100%. So exactly, and being staffed properly and getting those early mediations and getting an early, even some decent offer on the front end as soon as you can is great for everyone involved, quite frankly. And even with a contingency-based firm, I think you have that bulldog in the courtroom. You have that pushing the gas pedal down, so ready to go ahead. And if it needs to go to trial, everyone is geared up for that. The attorney is ready for it from his documentation end. We're absolutely ready for it from our preparation and our documentation and what we need to do. So having that same unified front will avoid those very lengthy and achy cases.
Of course. No, I mean, I kind of like the way Paul structures the deal as well. Because like I tell my clients, oh, we're concerned with contingency based. Well, listen, he's the one carrying the cost. He's going to want to get this done.
Exactly.
Yeah. So there's some benefits there. You gotta weigh it out because associations are nonprofits, right? So there's not extra cash flow just sitting around to be able to deal with this. So I want to leave it with you, Ben, here, because we get the question a lot of times. We're in the process of 558. We have issues with the building. Is your recommendation, and then I'll give it to you as well, Paul, from the legal side, would you recommend making necessary repairs at that time in the midst of that battle?
Absolutely. I mean, the association has a requirement to maintain their building.
Yeah.
And even if that means correcting construction defects that are causing, any life safety concern, that's without question, barring that, but still, even lifestyle, even daily operations that need to be maintained, we 100% recommend it. So while you're in the actual 558 process, there's really just 1 or 2 additional steps that you need to follow. And it is to go ahead and place the opposing side on notice that you will be going ahead and finding a contractor, bidding it out, and going ahead and doing that repair. So, I mean, per the 558, and Paul, please jump in if I'm saying anything incorrectly, they need to have the opportunity to step in and actually do that repair if they want to. More times than not, they likely won't, especially if it's going to be a very costly repair.
Correct.
But still, they need to have the opportunity to step in and man up, so to speak. But 100% take care of your building. If not, you will be paying for it later in the case, quite frankly, because they will start questioning some of your damages. And by saying, well, you knew about it at year 1 and we're at year 4 right now and you still haven't done anything about it. So things certainly didn't get better within that time frame.
Okay, excellent. And Paul, from your side, let's say that the board does decide, or what's your take on doing some of these repairs beforehand?
Well, I certainly agree that repairs have to be made in the sense that you need to keep the building livable, and you definitely have to take care of any life safety issues. But we like to look at repairs as interim repairs. The problem with doing a full-blown permanent repair to a defect is that you just put a cap on how much you can request in damages in the case. And because these cases resolve typically through a mediated settlement, you're negotiating. And so if you're starting at the full amount of the repairs, you're going to negotiate down from there. If those repairs can be appropriately characterized as interim repairs, then you have the ability to say, we're still entitled to something more. This is just temporary to
Yeah.
get us through the litigation. But the real repair is something that's substantially more, and that gives you bargaining leverage. There can be instances in which there is no interim repair. We've had situations where roofs leaked so bad, the association just decided they were going to go ahead and completely replace the roofs, knowing what they were doing to their bargaining leverage in the case, but they balanced it out and decided that that was really in the best interest of the association. But those have a tendency to be the exceptions rather than the rules. And yes, Ben is right. The defense will say, well, you've known about it. And I think the response is, yeah, we may have known about it, but we didn't really have the money to fix it properly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And if you hadn't screwed it up to begin with, we wouldn't be in this position.
Correct.
So we did the best we could under the circumstances, and now we need to go back and do it correctly so that the component survives for its entire useful life.
Correct. Excellent point. And I know we've seen it from management side where sometimes, during the turnover as well, kind of going back a bit, is where you'll get these simple waivers or releases that the developer provides. I know the answer here, but what's your take on that, Paul? Have you seen that?
There's nothing wrong with signing a release if you have a good knowledge, thorough knowledge about exactly what it is that you're releasing. What you're talking about, Raphael, is the developer does a $25,000 repair and they want a full release for everything that could possibly go wrong in the building.
Correct.
And that's just nuts.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's even lawyers that recommend, oh yeah, go ahead and sign it.
Yeah.
And then you find out, a year later that all the siding is leaking or something. Yeah. So if it's a small repair, either pay for it yourself. But whatever you do, don't sign a release. Never sign a release unless it's very limited in scope, or you've done a thorough investigation of your building, and so you have a pretty good idea of everything that's wrong, and you're willing to accept whatever that might be. That is whatever it is that they're offering in settlement.
And
Okay.
one more thing I'd like to add on that is that for any sort of, let's say, middle of the road repair, like that $25,000 repair, is that if you're doing it like during this time frame, during the whole DA process, and using that term loosely, rely upon your engineer to be your technical voice and to do those interim inspections. That will give the association management company better footing and better confidence, quite frankly, to go ahead and sign on any limited release, barring any legal aspects to that release form. But the last thing that we see, want to see, is that a contractor or the original contractor or developer will come in and do whatever they want and really just put a Band-Aid there. And they don't let either the association or engineer or the attorney know, and you're going to pay for it down the line, because it's going to be hard for the engineer to even prove what was there initially without any sort of proof.
Sure.
So being a part of that process and trying to filter whatever is going to be potentially coming in through your consultants by the engineer and your attorney is only going to make your repairs, or even paid by the opposing side, that much better.
Of course. Now we've had the experience years ago where before the Great Recession, or right after the Great Recession, I should say, where, the developer had agreed to make, an engineering report was provided, and the developer agreed to make the repairs. The board at that time just wanted to let the developer do the repairs, and our strict recommendation was whatever repairs they do should be supervised by the engineer that we hired. What's your take on that? What's your take on that, Ben? Because some boards, and I understand this, and they're trying to save costs, but they have to really keep in mind the end game. Developer, once he's gone, he's gone. You're not going to see him back in 10 years. But what's your recommendation when the board does have a developer that's being somewhat cooperative and does want to do the repair that, let's say, you outlined in that report?
It's really a documentation game. It's making sure these boxes are checked on the front end, just like if the association were to go ahead and undertake the repair themselves. You need to have, depending on the technicality, you need to have the repair protocol with some product submittals, the limits of construction, schedules, who's going to be actually doing the work. if there are any warranties that would go into it. If hopefully you can negotiate and still press on the actual subcontractor doing the work and squeeze out a warranty, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But getting all that knowledge and having your engineer not really develop the plans, because that will be costly, but give at least the first shot to the opposing side. They are all, I mean, if they are gonna want to get out of whatever issue or whatever case, they should have to put in the effort to do so. They have consultants as well. Have them spend their money initially and have your engineer opine and make comments accordingly. Once that is all set, then you will have just your inspections. It's not a 24/7 monitoring of them. I mean, that's not necessary, quite frankly. But at key milestones where things can go haywire, that's where you want to be. So usually after demolition. So when you're looking at, you remove all the stucco, you remove all the waterproofing, and you see, okay, well, what condition is the structure here? Do we have to do something more serious? Is it caused by some movement up and down that we need to have a structural design done? Those things can balloon projects, and you want to make sure that you've set the motions and set everybody in their appropriate places before you get into that Pandora's box.
Of course. Excellent. And the same thing goes, Paul, I would say on the legal side. I mean, we want to make sure that there's some kind of at least basic agreement, right, on those terms, correct?
Well, first off, you need to have an agreement in writing. And so you need to know what the scope is going to be.
Correct.
Number one. Number two, you absolutely have to have independent oversight. If you're not going to have independent oversight, don't even bother to do it.
Yeah.
Because the thing is that when everybody involved is already on the hook for the defective work, there's no downside to them to do more defective work. You know, it's not like somebody new who comes in doesn't have any liability exposure. They're going to want to avoid any liability exposure. And typically when a developer says, yeah, we want to do repairs, what they mean is we want our subcontractors to do the repairs at no additional expense to us.
Correct.
And you can imagine how excited the subcontractors are about that sort of thing. and you know, we've negotiated pre-litigation settlements on a number of occasions with major builders, and it can definitely work. But you have to have you know, a builder who is willing to fill in for subcontractors that aren't there anymore, who's willing to put money in where there's additional work, additional product that the subcontractor would otherwise have to go out and pay for. Because in the absence of those very practical contributions,
I think we lost Paul there for a second. So I'll jump to you, Ben, because we do have a question here from Suzanne. Are there any sites that you could recommend for engineers, civil or forensic engineers, for boards to research?
Well, typically what we see a lot of our clients where they come through is actually through the management companies. I mean, you have a massive Rolodex, so to speak,
Correct.
of preferred vendors, and engineers or a forensic engineer should be no different. Hopefully they're categorized as forensic engineers, not just your regular engineers. But as long as you have that, I would use that as your first available resource. After that, I mean, there's several other governing bodies. I mean, there's an association called the NAFE, so the National Association of Forensic.
come on, Ben, you can tell them about Epic.
I mean, I'm not going to do a huge plug. I mean, but you absolutely always call on us. We're always ready to go ahead and help. But I would say, really, it's a lot of our business, I know, is through word of mouth, and is through a lot of our good relationships with property managers and management companies. So I would rely upon the services and all the tools that you guys have. Correct.
And to add to that, Susan, as Ben said, you know, it really depends on the partners that you're working with. If you're a self-managed community, obviously it's going to be a little bit different. You'll have to reach out to your attorneys and your partners that you currently have. But, you know, if you're working with the right partner, they should have a strong Rolodex, as Ben stated, where they could be able to reach the specific targeted vendor that you need for this kind of work. If you don't have it, feel free to reach out to either of us, and I'm sure we'll be glad to share our contacts with you to help you guide you through this process. Ben, I wanted to ask you, because we haven't spoken a bit about the report itself, right? Can you tell our boards and managers what the 558 includes? Like, what do you include within that report that you prepare?
Yes, absolutely. So we're keeping on the surface, at least, of the steps involved. So it would be first to do the document review. So reviewing any documents that get turned over, quite frankly, and any of those additional wish list items, which we won't hold our breath for. And then you do your several site evaluations and collect your data, and then the report really gets built. Now, what that report really entails is going to be a general description of the property, the basis for the engineering evaluation, the document, a list of the documents and the governing codes that are applicable based on the permit date, which is going to be crucial because certain codes are going to be applicable in a 2004 code that won't be applicable in a 2010 code. And you'll also see some projects that finished in 2015 are actually based off of a 2001 code for whatever reason. So giving that, and then we get into the actual meat of the report. And the way that we actually do our reporting is to make it as easy on the opposing side as possible. Now, what I mean by that is we're going to be issuing a report that's going to look very similar to War and Peace as far as thickness is concerned. So to give that to a tile contractor who has a very limited scope, he's not going to want to go, he or she's not going to want to read the entire Bible, so to speak.
Yeah.
So we break it up by construction disciplines. So when the general contractor gets it, they can rip it out and rip out the sections that they need. And within it, it will include outlining the defects. And so we put a numbering system to each and every defect that we observe. We'll give you the objective location, what we saw there, what category falls into, defect, deviation, code violation, or that improper turnover maintenance, the discipline, and the criteria, why we're saying it's wrong. That's the most crucial part. I mean, I can't just say it's wrong because I'm an engineer and I know everything. That's the wrong way to go about it, and that's not going to help your case. So we use objective analysis. We use any of the industry standards that we have available to us in the library. And then we also include several photos.
Okay.
And the benefit of this, at least for a condo, is that they'll have all the photos. All of our reports have photos, but anyone can get there. Our goal is to write our report to a very wide audience. So it is palatable by the very technical. It is palatable by the layperson. It is palatable by a jury, ultimately at the end of the day, so that everybody can understand and at least get there. We can help explain along the way, but we want to get there. And one other thing that we do as part of our large scale HOAs, because they're massive sites, or even just any horizontal work, is we like to utilize a lot of GPS coordinates.
Excellent.
So we even issue, in addition to our report, a GPS, so like a Google Earth file.
Yeah.
We have the attorneys send that out so that we limit our involvement. We limit the amount of additional services for a walkthrough, for example. If they can't find something, then we'll absolutely step in. But by making it as easy as possible for the opposing side, you're going to make them more receptive to play in your sandbox.
Of course, excellent. And with what you said, I mean, putting together a report like that, there's a lot of people involved. And in the midst of COVID, what steps are you and your team taking? Because I know we've had, people during the 558 process or inspection process, you're talking sometimes 3 to 10 people coming into a unit. What steps are you taking at this time for those board members that are maybe antsy of asking residents to let them into their units? What steps are you and your firm doing throughout this time?
Well, aside from already protecting ourselves and protecting the people around us with the proper gear and proper face masks and maintaining social distancing, the good news about what our work really entails, it has minimal involvement to the actual association. So for a typical site, for example, aside from the units, I mean, we probably have about 4 days that are going to be just around the general site, on your roof, walking through the corridors, doing your overall horizontal work, your parking garage. The only area that we do get in a spot that we have to focus on is going to be residential units. Now, our teams that would go into these units would probably be no more than 4 individuals. At that point in time, we have very specific roles. 1 individual or 2 individuals may be solely out on the exterior doing the balconies, focusing out there. And their involvement on the interior is just walking straight through. And we'll have 1 or 2 people on the inside just focusing on your finishes and your mechanical, electrical, plumbing components. So we try to be very organized on the front end. And now with COVID surrounding us all right now, we're maintaining every safe capacity that we can. And the benefit about taking our sample size for the units that we get into, if a unit owner does not feel comfortable having outsiders come in, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
We like to have a random sample anyways. It maintains objectivity for us. and it maintains our credibility as we go ahead and write the reports as well. So if we need to do a substitution, we do a substitution. It's not a problem.
Okay, excellent. And Paul, with, you know, when you receive a report of that thickness, what part of those defects are normally covered within the claim that you're going to file for the association?
Well, one of the things is that the insurance policies don't actually cover the defective claim itself. That would be a construction bond. What they do cover is damage or loss of use caused by that defective component. So, for example, if the roof leaks, the insurance does not directly cover the roof itself. It covers the damage caused by that leaky roof, and it covers the cost of repairing the roof so that the interior damage doesn't continue to occur. So it's a little bit more nuanced than that, but we can generally find insurance coverage for almost anything. You know, that's how we make our living.
Excellent. So, other than that, what other with new constructions, or what other projects would you guys cover when it comes to construction defects? Is there any other defects outside of just the 558 that the association would have coverage, or that your firm could represent them in?
Well, for us, we are specialists. We limit our practice to handling 558 claims and then the developer transition leading up to them. So we don't do the other kinds of claims that are out there. We think that we're going to pick one thing and we're going to do it really well, and we're not going to try and spread ourselves out and tell somebody that, you know, we're a jack of all trades and we can do whatever it is that they need. If somebody has a hurricane claim, we're going to refer them to somebody else, because we're not going to do that kind of work. We try to be very, very true to what our skills are and to just focus on those.
Excellent. Thank you. So we're wrapping up here in respect to your time, and respect to our fellow board members and managers that are online. I wanted to ask you guys one last question. Are there any tips that you would recommend with this Chapter 558 process, or anything that we may have missed that you want to express to our listeners today? Ben, I'll start with you.
I mean, it would be getting those lists and being as organized as you can on the front end. It will save a lot of time, and it may sound a bit arduous right now, but that will keep the process moving. The process you'll see is going to be initially controlled by the association. You'll be in the driver's seat as far as the timeline is concerned up until the issuance of the report. Then it is out of your control. For you to go ahead and have everything ready, like plans. Plans is number one. As long as you have those plans, you'll have the basis for your evaluation. We've seen certain projects, quite frankly, hold up for several months because of those. So if everything is collected on the front end, you can knock out your engineering part very seamlessly and get it rolling as fast as you can. That would be my biggest takeaway for any association, is just work with your managers, work with the relationship that you have with the developer right now, if you're prior to turnover, even thereafter. Maintain those. At least you have a line of communication just to get more data if they're still willing to do so.
Of course. Thank you, Ben. And Paul, before you get into that question, I do have one question here from a gentleman named Scott. He's asking, I understand that construction bonds were not worth the money until the project reaches a significant amount of money.
Oh, so you're talking about whether or not you're going to use a construction bond in connection with a contract that the association is putting out. I think that's what he's talking about. And you know, that's a more personal discussion, really kind of beyond the scope of this. Sometimes construction bonds can make a lot of sense. The project goes sideways. You can be really glad that you asked for one. But they're going to run, you know, 10% of the cost of the contract, and the association is going to pay for that. So you know, you have to really think long and hard. In my experience, most associations are not going to require the contractor to purchase. There's actually two of them: a payment bond and a construction bond. But it's pretty unusual, just because most associations don't want to pay the extra 10% for the bond And frankly, you're probably better off, except for in really large cases where, spending enough money on oversight that you keep control of the project, and just don't let it get out of control.
And one more thing to actually add on to that real fast is that, I mean, for any of the development of these new condos or new HOAs, is that they'll all likelihood would have those bonds, but by the time it's actually turned over to the association, those things would likely already be closed out.
Yep.
I know that's probably part of Paul's initial review once they jump on a case right at turnover, is to see if there's anything still active, any active bonds, but 9.9 times out of 10, they aren't anymore.
The bond company's on it. Let's close this out.
Exactly. They want their money
Yeah,
back.
they want their
money back, right?
Yeah,
That's
money,
exactly right.
yeah, of course. So Paul, I didn't get to ask you this. Any last closing remarks that you want to give our board members?
Well, one thing I did want to do is apologize for my appearance. I had a bit of a cycling calamity this morning, and so I didn't make it home. I'm actually not even home yet. So I don't normally dress like this for a presentation, so I apologize to everybody. At least I made it, though.
And I think your words are worth more than what you're wearing at the moment. No.
Okay, thank you.
So my closing remarks is I kind of lean on what Ben said. It's very important to not only work with the right organizations, but also to ask the right questions. As Paul stated earlier, you want to understand what kind of conflicts there may exist, and then you have to make the business decision. It's not an automatic reaction. I'm not going to work with them because of that. You just need to understand what you're looking at. So just make sure you're getting the information that Ben mentioned earlier, because having those plans and those documents there are very important. Having the proper legal representation is very important as well. And making sure that you're working with the right management partner that can help you guide you, I should say, through this process. Having those three, it will give you that three-legged stool and allow you to really get things done the way it should be done. So gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for being here today. It's honestly been an honor being alongside both of you. I think our panelists, our guests have received significant amount of information. I do want to remind those individuals that are a CAM, please make sure you turn in your evaluations. Diana did place the email in the chat. So make sure you email your CAM license number to her. And also, board members, you'll receive an evaluation. We'll greatly appreciate you taking the time to fill that out. Anything we can do to improve the educational courses that us three do, we'll be glad to do so. So thank you again, gentlemen. I look forward to doing another panel with you.
Great job, Raphael. Great job.
Thank you very much. This was very enjoyable.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Raphael and Paul and Ben. I just wanted to let you know that I've received text messages from participants telling Paul, thank you, Paul. You did a great job. Don't worry about it. So we're just glad you made it. So I had to say that. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.